The objective here is to go over an approach to testing in my CIS and CNG courses. Right here I'm just trying to give a little guidance. We've all seen a variety of study guides or terms on the test to study for that professors will give students. I gave one out, which was just a list of words. I also said the best study guide is your actual notebook. This video will just go over how to use that to study and then the answers to the questions on the test we just took. So let's start with this idea. How many of you say one thing and then do another? Like, how many times do we tell ourselves we're going to do something, like study, and then just not? That's step one. Following through on what you tell yourself you'll be doing. Avoiding whatever distraction there is out there that would keep you from doing that. Now, one of the things I wish I knew in college is when I was in a course, I should have been recognizing the most challenging part of what I was learning and then just really focus on that, right? Why study what you already feel very comfortable with or already know? My version of studying in college was just go through the notes I wrote down, read through the book if there was a book. But for the most part, all I really did, I just worked hard in class, just try to focus in class. But that's just me. I'm not a very good example, or past me is not a good example. I just was never one of those students who was overly concerned with the grade. But by doing this thing where I really focused on just the class while being in the class, and then turning in those assignments, I just felt like I created a great buffer for myself, a buffer in the beginning that was often destroyed by the actual final exam grade I got. But my grades were not really bad. I didn't have to do any serious reflection to figure out what needed to change. But the teacher me sees a lot of students failing, and I think they should take advice like this, creating the buffer in the beginning, actually studying when they know there are things that are challenging. If I was to give you some specific examples of how to study here, I would say use Google Image, create questions from your own notes, then answer those questions, or get answers to questions that you've come up with. I suggest you look for other sources of information, not just from the professor or from the Google image or just one source, look for multiple sources. And so I have my college degree, but I used these types of strategies to do the things I'm a little more proud of, to be honest. I'm a little more proud of the certs I have. I know they're baby certs, the A+, Cloud Essentials. At least I know my study techniques, they succeeded. Because taking any of these types of certs I don't think is easy. Even if you know the material, you have to focus for that 90 or more minutes straight. Okay, so since I had two different classes, this next part will be different depending on which class you're in. What I'm going to do, though, is this Q&A format, so I'm going to show you the test question and then show you what the right answer is, show you ways you could have studied to get that right answer based on what I gave ahead of time, the study guide and the notes from class. And then just moving forward here, I want you to think about this. Einstein said something like, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing, but expecting different results. If you did not pass the test, I suggest you not do the exact same thing you did before the test. And here's a couple examples. Before the test, when I gave you the list of terms, did you do anything with that list? Did you identify anything challenging, any challenging terms, and go after that knowledge? Did you ask me or a friend, or did you Control F in your notebook to review what you wrote about that term? I even suggest going to Wikipedia and using Control F with those terms as well. And I'll let you read the rest here, but there's many things you can do with just the terms that I tell you will be on the test. I think part of this know thyself mentality I always preach to my students goes beyond just knowing if you're a visual or auditory learner, a textbook learner, maybe a debater, a social person who likes to discuss the learning. More than just that, know what you ultimately want out of life. Are you just trying to get this college credit? Then let that desire motivate you to make the right choices with these terms as you're trying to study, as you may be trying to do something a little painful here. If you're one of the students who want to go into the tech field or industry, this is probably what you'll be doing. The tech industry is rapidly changing. There's always new technologies. You have to research and learn about these new things in order to stay employable. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive into these questions themselves and reflect on how to better prepare for the next test. So for my CIS 118 students, one of the questions is, A simple one. I wanted to give you confidence to start the test off. What does Burger King makes great toast stand for? Well, it's a silly phrase to hopefully easily remember the order that data is stored in. You can look at data at the bit level, the byte level. You can look at it in kilobytes, megabytes, gigabytes, terabytes. Many times I've seen KB and MB next to each other, and I had forgotten which one was the larger one. And you might have noticed I didn't mention anything about Burger King in the study guide, but I did mention every single one of these in that exact order. And you know what? I don't have to harp on this question because I think 99% of students got it right. I think it's even 100%. So let's move on to one that was a little tougher. The question was simply like, what do ones and zeros represent in computer science? And a lot of students got this right. Some people answered it in a little fancier fashion than others, but it's all about ons and offs, as you can see in this picture. It's all about wires having a certain amount of voltage on them. The more vocab you can stuff into your answer, the more I feel better about your knowledge of that answer. So then a good follow-up question was this one. Why do we even bother converting ones and zeros to denary? Many students have forgotten what denary means, but using logic, if they answered using the word easier at all, or said something about it being simpler to read, that's perfectly fine. Now, 90% of your notebooks out there, you had binary numbers being converted to regular numbers. So when you see a question like this, just identifying the keyword convert, you just think about what you had done before, and then think about why you did that conversion. To quote one of my students, if you simply said to make looking at or understanding code easier, I was completely accepting of that. Students in my class know that I harp on the term coder, that a coder is a person working with the ones and zeros. A programmer is a person working with a higher level language. If you remember, encoding is taking a series of ones and zeros, a pattern, right, and connecting that pattern to an actual thing that is lit up on the screen, whether it's color or letters. That term encoding is where we get coder from. And here we go with another student quote. This is so terrific. They even provided an additional example. So when I look at this, the answer to this question, I just know that they know the right answer. And of course, this is the second part to this first part where they said to make looking at or understanding code easier. Okay, so let's move on here. Next question. What does it mean to steal data? Maybe I was a bad teacher by doing this, but I said by answering this, you'll essentially be answering the question, what is a data breach? I think that second part tripped up some students. But what I'm looking for and what we studied is that you are stealing files, and we could be talking about images or documents or information in a database. This question was one of the tougher ones. But when we did our file and file management lesson, I thought I was making it pretty clear that that's what a data breach is, or that's what you're accessing when you're connecting to servers. Okay, so if I go back and I look at all the terms I gave you to study for, and then I jump over here to my notebook, we'll pretend the student's notebook's mine, and let's say I type in files, or even just file, because now there's 17 of them. Okay, so the first one is up here. I know how to access and organize files, but I don't know how to make backups. If I go down here, the title of this day is backup and files. So yeah, as we click through here, we see the word files a lot. And if I'm a student studying for a test, I just kind of reread these words that I've already written. So I have heard of backups and files before. I've definitely used files before. They are important. You should make a backup every single file. When you read that, like, why would you need a backup? It could go with something down here, like when the student asked, how can someone lose a file? And I answered them way back on August 28th. I answered that you could forget where you saved it, but maybe you lose it because someone steals it. Or if I'm in this mindset of data breaches, go back up here. Why should you back up files? Well, in case of a data breach. Whether it's a ransomware attack and data is being encrypted so you can't access it, or the breach happens and that particular file or data is just completely taken. Okay, so let me keep going down here. There are many different types of file formats. That's a good connection to make. Depending on the importance of a file, you should have several copies. Like there's a keyword importance. A file stores data. Oh my gosh, right there, that's it. A file is data and data is a file. So these are the connections, these are the study habits I'm hoping you guys can start implementing in order to succeed. This one was kind of easy This one was kind of easy, I thought. How can numbers be used to represent color? Lots of students did this terrifically. Right, I say great examples right here. Some were even able to mention hexadecimal, which was extra terrific. I can give full points for that connection right there. And I think after my last example, and then you making the connection that this was a particularly fun hands-on activity we did in class, the pattern is that when classwork goes well, the test goes well. It's just a pretty logical connection. Okay, another question was, why do people want to compress data? To save room on a hard drive is a quote from a student. Totally correct. And then a few students talked about data transfer, which is also a huge reason to compress data. Maybe even a bigger, better reason than the storage idea, because storage is kind of cheap nowadays. Well, let's move on to this question. What is a file extension? Right, that was on the list. So if you had Control F, and actually, let's go to Wikipedia for this one. So say I'm studying, and I see this word on my study guide, file extension. Let me jump to file extension Wikipedia. I'll click that. I'll Control F again and type in file extension, so it's just highlighted inside the text. Okay, a file extension is typically delimited from the file name with a full stop, but in some systems it is separated with spaces. Alright, that one's a little rough at this level, I think. Here's another one. Default behavior for React OS is to display file extensions in the React OS Explorer. That one is rough as well. Some viruses take advantage of the similarity between the .com top-level domain and the .com. Alright, so, I mean, it is good. It's interesting because it's dealing with cybersecurity, but it's a good sentence because I see the dot and then 3 letters. Doesn't have to be 3, but that's a good example for a student to use in answering that test question. And then this one, I really like it. The file extension is just a marker and the content of the file does not have to match it. So it's just a marker. You're saying I can name a text file .jpeg, which is usually for images, but it's actually text. So alright, I am learning from this list, this study guide list that the teacher gave. And that's the point of the list. So for me, the question, what is a file extension? Very surprised how many students answered it wrong. I'll take some responsibility, but of course this is great data for me to know that we need to go over it some more in class. So don't beat yourself up too much over getting it wrong. That's why we're in school. Okay, and let me point this out, and if it's you, it's okay. I'm not calling you out by name. Well, there was more than one of you, actually. I'm just trying to encourage you to laugh at yourself here, because when looking at this question, what is a file extension? I put an extension cord here. Some students thought that it was the opposite of compression and that people would for some reason want to make a file extended, like larger. Definitely not. I love the effort though, of course, because you're trying to use logic to answer questions correctly. Like, that's what we all do. Okay, so the next question had to do with what types of components plug into the motherboard. Lots of students getting this one correct. Another, particular activity we did in class, and that's probably why it's just extra memorable. I wish I could do that for all the lessons. There's a limit, in my opinion, to how fun we can make tech. I'm also trying to prepare you for the real world, the working world, and sitting in front of a computer doing some of these things is just not going to be the most thrilling part of your day every day for the whole year. Anyway, if you said a hardware component like RAM, processor, lots of students said many things, you got it right. I meant many more things that go into the motherboard. All right, so here's our final question. What's the difference between hardware and software? This should have been a pretty softball question. Again, my CIS tests were particularly good. CNG, the next course, that one is a little bit of a harder course, and the test average percentage was reflecting that too. Well, if you mentioned anything about the hardware being actually a physical thing and software being stuff that you find as files or inside of folders or that deal with the ones and zeros, those are bits, any mention of these types of terms got you that question correct. So with that said, we only have 3 more tests for this CIS course, and if you have any new ideas on how to approach taking these tests that I didn't cover, please let me know, so when I do the next one of these, I can add it to that one. Maybe you have a strategy that allowed you to do really well. Share it with me, share it with the rest of us, so we can all learn together.